Hey, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Making IT Security Part of Your Business Culture, and that's brought to you by Dark Rating, KnowBe4, and it's broadcast by UBM. My name is Brian Gillooly. I'm the Vice President of Event, Content, and Strategy for UBM Tech. I'll be your moderator today, and if you're a veteran of our webcast, you know that before we jump in, we do have just a few announcements. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event, and you may also download a copy of the slides by clicking on the green folder icon that's located at the bottom of your screen. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during this webinar. Just type your question into the Q&A window to the right of the presentation window, and then do not forget to click the submit button, very important. We highly recommend that you don't wait until the end to ask your questions, as they tend to pile up. We want to make sure to get to as many of them as we can, and if you wait too long, we may end up not being able to get to it, and we hope that doesn't happen. In fact, by consensus from our speakers today, we've decided we're going to award an Oscar to the person who asks the best question today. And by Oscar, we're not saying OSCAR, we're saying OSQOR, and that stands for Online Super Question of Relevance. So if you ask the best question, we'll identify you and make you a star at the end of the event by claiming you your Oscar, OSQOR, Online Super Question of Relevance. At the end of the webinar, we will also ask you to complete our feedback form. That information really helps us improve our events for you, so we greatly appreciate your comments. And you can also launch the survey at any time by clicking on the red survey button at the bottom of the console. At this time, we also do recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. And if you're experiencing any technical problems, we sure hope you don't, but if you do, please type your question into the Q&A text area. We'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. So now on to our presentation, Making IT Security Part of Your Business Culture. Discussing today's topic is Michelle Fincher, who is the COO and Chief Influencing Agent for Social Engineer, LLC. Michelle has more than 20 years of experience as a behavioral scientist, researcher, and information security professional. She is a senior penetration tester and trainer for Social Engineer with professional expertise in all facets of social engineering, vectors, assessments, and research. Michelle is joined by her colleague, Chris Hadnagy. He's the CEO, founder, and chief human hacker for Social Engineer, LLC. I love these titles, guys. Chris has more than 16 years of experience as a practitioner and researcher in the security field, and his efforts in training, education, and awareness have helped to expose social engineering as the top threat to the security of organizations today. And we also have Eric Krohn. He is the Security Awareness Advocate for KnowBe4. And Eric has more than 18 years of experience in the medical, aerospace, manufacturing, and defense fields. He is the former security manager for the 2nd Regional Cyber Center, Western Hemisphere, and holds multiple security certifications. So we have some top-notch folks here to talk to us. So Michelle, I'm going to turn things over to you to get us started.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I hope you all are doing very well. Chris and I are very pleased to be here today to spend a few moments with you to talk about your security programs. It's one of those things that we all know we need, and yet another thing altogether to implement well and effectively. And so we have a few ideas, having been in the business for a while and helped some clients improve their programs, and hopefully we'll give you some pointers and give you some ideas to really get going on your security programs. Okay, so if you joined us last time, in our last exciting episode, we did have Stormtrooper Doberman, and I know it's a little weird if you have no context altogether, but the discussion in general was the fact that technology by itself is a good thing. It's the Doberman puppy. We know that we all need it. We need to have good technology in place. You need to have up-to-date antiviruses. You need to patch your systems. You need to have those good firewalls. So technology is good. It's a baseline, and it's sort of a minimum requirement. Technology plus policy is better. That's the attack Doberman. That's where you know you have good technology as a baseline, and you also have policies in place that really help your people make good decisions, make secure decisions, and don't make security a burden for them to implement on a daily basis. So that's the attack Doberman. But when you really want to get to the Stormtrooper Doberman, the ultimate Doberman, you need to have good technology, you need to have great and clear policies, and you need to take the time and effort to educate your population, and that's going to get you to awesome.
Does the Doberman have to have painted fingernails, though?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's the Uber Doberman. Thank you for that question, Chris. So I'm showing my age here, but you know I'm an old Mario Brothers fan. So you have an information security program. You have just leveled up. Congratulations. And the real question is, now what? Now you could be sort of the standard run-of-the-mill company in which you run security awareness program. Once a year, remind your folks of the bad things that they shouldn't do. But we're going to say this more than once because Chris and I think that it's really, really important. You are going to ask your staff to make security decisions probably every single day. And if you are only reminding them once a year about the important things, the important actions that they should be taking, you're really doing your population a disservice. So I'll start with that and then pass it to Chris, and we'll talk about different ways and different things that you consider in creating your security programs and making sure they're effective.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. So let's move right to that next piece. Let me see here. Yep, there we are. So questions to ask yourself. Michelle and I usually start this exercise with people that ask us how to even develop a good security awareness program. And we say before you even pick what you're doing, how you're doing it, you need to first start off with figuring out what it is that you want to accomplish. So how are you going to measure your results? What is that you're looking at doing? Let's use phishing for an example, because that's the most popular right now as far as security awareness goes. It's one of the biggest vectors being used in breaches around the globe. So some people will say, well, I think we'll measure it by click ratio. So if we see the click ratio go down, that means that we're doing good, right? Well, I would say no to that because click ratio alone only tells you if your population was interested in that theme this month. So we try to add something into that, like reporting ratio. Not only how many people clicked it, but how many people reported it. And if you can see those numbers adjust in a positive, less people clicking, but more people reporting, now you have a good measurement tool. So you first have to ask yourself these series of questions. You know, what are you going to measure? Why are you measuring it? What behaviors sense to you and your population that would be things that you want to see, and what behaviors don't you want to see? And once you have that clearly outlined, then you can start working on what it is that you want to accomplish and how you'll accomplish those goals. You have anything to add to that, Michelle?
I think the only other thing is that once you get into your security programs and really thinking about ways to measure success, there will be other factors. You know, Chris talked about the importance of click and reporting ratios together, but are there other ways that you're looking at whether or not your population is more secure? So in other words, what about measuring malware on your network that is as a result of your folks clicking on emails? Are there other ways that you can measure success? So are they reporting more? Is there a reduction in malware? What about other kinds of things that don't involve a click at all? Do you know whether or not your population is responding to the emails that they get? What about if they get an email or a phish that asks them to call back or text? So there's all kinds of things that you can be looking at to give you a pretty fair judgment of how secure your population really, really is.
Excellent. I just moved it to the second slide.
Yeah, that's me, huh? Okay.
Yep.
Some
Hint, hint.
some additional questions to ask yourself. So this is part 2. So in addition to those difficult metrics questions, the other thing to think about is your culture. And culture, you're in the best, being an employee of your company, you're in the best position to know. You know, you're the security professional. What is it about your culture that you should know that indicates whether or not they're secure? Do they report? Are they thinking about things? You know, do they communicate well amongst themselves? And if not, what are ways that you can do to create that? Because the bottom line is we want to be able to create a culture in which not only are they secure at work and making good decisions at work, we want those behaviors to translate at home, because really you want a person to make secure decisions regardless of where they are. So as a security professional, as a member of your organization, you are really in the best position to know and observe those important changes in your organization. So in other words, if people really responded to a phish, like Chris said earlier, do you know why it happened? Was there maybe a change in management? Was there something in the news that was current and on people's minds? Or on the flip side of that, if you got 0 clicks, were there a lot of folks on vacation? Was it a holiday? Was there something else going on in the company, like a company event? It also means that you have to have a fairly realistic expectation of the time frame in which you want to see change. Because all of us, we want to be able to fix things right away. We want to see good changes happen immediately. But the kinds of things that Chris and I are talking about, changes in reporting behavior, changes in culture, and a security mindset, those are all things that aren't going to happen in weeks or even months. And so having an expectation of what you're going to see, and your management having an expectation of what you're going to see, needs to be given some thought to very carefully. So it's really important to set those realistic, concrete goals, measure the change appropriately, and know what it is what you're looking for. Anything to add, Chris?
Yeah, I think what's important about that second question that we have listed here is oftentimes when you're new to this, when you're, let's say this is the first time your organization is really focusing on security awareness, it's hard to figure out what motivates people. So we automatically go to the negative, which is fear, right? We're going to tell them that if they mess up, they're getting fired, or we're going to shame them by listing their names on a website of everyone who failed this month. And that motivator for us, in the years of doing this together, we have seen that never works. It will only work when they think Big Brother's watching, and it creates a bad environment, not a very good security-related culture in your organization. So we find when you ask yourself that question, how do I get people to stop and think before they act? It's through positive reinforcement. And we're going to go through some steps in that, especially in our next slide, and how we can do that. But really focusing on how to motivate people without the use of fear or punishment or shame. It can make your organization very, very strong from a security posture. And that really brings us right to this slide, which is making it personal. Just like any of us, when something affects us, not just at work, but when we can apply it to our personal lives, it has such more deeper application to us. So we want to create secure habits that don't just protect your company. We find working with many companies, and also companies that we've never worked with, just in discussions about this, that they have seen the most drastic changes in a positive way when they've taught their employees something that they can take home. We've actually heard reports from clients where their employees have come back and said, hey, you know that phish that you sent as a test, I actually saw a real one at home the other day, and I didn't click it because of what you taught us. Very popular phish that went around, like you missed a package from FedEx or UPS. They weren't just hitting people at work. They were hitting people at home, on their cell phones, everywhere. So when you make training personal, and it affects that individual not only at their employment but at home, and they can go home and teach their mom, their dad, their brother, their husband, their wife, their kids these things, then it becomes something that becomes part of their life, and you've created a security-conscious environment in your organization. You have anything to add to that, Michelle?
Nope, I am ready to move on.
Excellent. Let me switch it there.
Okay. I plead guilty for putting this slide in because I love this picture. I'm a boxing fan. But it really stresses the point here. You can't just be satisfied with training and speaking at your folks. You really do need to put your folks through the test. You need to make them make a decision when they are presented with a problem, with a security problem or a security challenge. I love this picture because Canelo Alvarez, the red-haired boxer, he's awesome. He's an incredible boxer. I would bet money that he could take any one of us and just mop up the ring with us. And that being said, the minute he actually was put to a legitimate test against Floyd Mayweather, he was just murdered in the ring. It was awful. So that really stresses the point about, your folks can really think that they're secure. They're like, yes, I know I don't click on these fish. I shouldn't answer questions from people I don't know. They know all of that, but they really need to be put in a position where they have to make a decision in an immediate fashion which will affect the security of your company. The testing needs to be realistic, right? They really do need to know if they can be in the ring with Floyd Mayweather. But there is a line, at least for Chris and I. We want to make sure that the populations that we help test aren't being exploited, aren't being humiliated, aren't being enraged, and that's for a lot of reasons. But the main one is that you can do a very legitimate test without having to do all of those things. The bad guys will go there, and we absolutely know that. But we think that good testing and valid testing can still be done in a realistic fashion without exploiting your population. So again, understand what you're measuring, right? You know what you're getting, and once you throw your folks in the ring and see how they really do, you will really know if that knowledge and those habits have sunk in. Anything to add, Chris?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that Michelle and I love this boxing analogy because it fits security awareness so well. If you were going to fight Floyd here and you went into a boxing gym and you asked your trainer to get you ready for this fight, and he put you down in front of a computer and showed you a 20-minute CBT on boxing and then put you in the ring with Floyd, you'd be thinking, what's wrong with this guy, right? This is unbelievable. I'm going to get killed out here. So don't do that to your people, right? We're not saying that CBTs don't have their place. They do. Professional boxers will watch videos all the time of their opponents to learn, but that's not the only thing they do. They actually get in the ring with protective gear so they're not getting killed. They learn how to give a punch. They learn how to take a punch. And our security awareness needs to be the same. That's why we called this slide the solution of instinct. It needs to be realistic, real-world testing where they feel what it's like to get fished. Many people, when they read articles on fishing, they think, I'd never fall for that, until it's sitting in their inbox and they've actually fallen for it, and then they realize what it feels like to get hit and what they should do when they get hit. So this is just such a great analogy for security awareness training, which kind of leads us right to our next principle.
And this is fabulous because I love this picture.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't know who's collecting the money if you touch the wires and then you're dead, but it's obviously an actionable policy, and that's the point, I think, of this slide, is what are your policies, right? We've actually read policies before, no joke, read a policy that said, don't click malicious links. Now, that sounds great on paper, but what if your person doesn't know what a malicious link is? So it's not very actionable, right? Just telling someone, don't do this. They need to be educated. How do I identify a malicious link? What does a malicious link look like? What if I click on a malicious link because I didn't know? What should I do after that? So actionable policies don't leave room for interpretation. So you don't want your people to have to interpret what malicious links are, or what questions shouldn't I answer on the phone, or is it okay to let this pregnant woman carrying a heavy box in without checking her badge? Don't leave that open for interpretation. Don't make safety such a burden that your people find ways to circumvent those policies. So a good policy should be easy for the person to follow, but also easy to enforce, and they should be very clear with little room for interpretation. Anything to add to that one, Michelle?
Yeah, I think the important point to understand is that by and large, people want to be helpful. People are nice and people are polite. And so if you give your folks the squish, the wiggle room to either be polite and helpful versus follow the rules, if there's a little bit of gray area in there, a lot of times people do choose to be helpful and polite. And that's really, it will cause difficulties for you when that's the case. All right, so what we have here are a couple of examples that we have seen implemented with our clients, and we tried to pick ones that related to all three of the social engineering attack vectors that we test in. So with respect to an email, all suspicious email / SMS must be reported to a very specific email address, which is great. And again, if that policy goes along with training on how to identify suspicious emails and what kinds of ways what kinds of things to examine, I think that at least is a fairly clear policy in terms of what must be done immediately. It has to be reported, and probably what would make it stronger is how it's going to be reported. Should it be forwarded immediately? Should it be sent as an attachment? Because something that you don't want to do is overload your incident response. And Chris and I have seen this as well, is if there are many different ways to report something suspicious, incident response is going to get phone calls, they're going to get emails, they're going to get people stopping by and sticking a head in their cubicle. There has to be a very consistent and clear way that incident response is going to be receiving those messages, so they're not going to be overwhelmed during any one event. They're going to be busy enough as it is if something suspicious happens. So the second example is that no information regarding company project may be disclosed to an unverified caller. Again, what is important that goes along with that very good policy is how do you then verify a caller? Is there an internal method that you're going to use? Is there going to be a lookup? Is there going to be a corporate directory? If someone calls me and they're a client, are they going to have to authenticate with information? So despite the fact that these policies are pretty clear, it is also imperative that they are all backed up with some form of training that specifies what this means. How do you verify a caller? What information is suspicious or not, and what information can even be released? So all visitors, they have to present a government-issued ID. What does that mean? Is like a corporate badge enough? Is that considered? Or does that really specify like a state or federal ID? Some other things to think about. Are there procedures in place for verification? Is there standard on how much information is okay to share versus what is definitely never okay to share? And along the lines of sharing, something else that Chris and I see quite often is the fact that there's no social media policy in place. Something that we in our line of work do is something called open source intelligence gathering, where we will take a look at a company and see what kind of information is available, not just on corporate social media, but individual social media. And if there's nothing in place at a corporate level in terms of what's acceptable and what's not, I think you have to really think about those consequences and what kind of information is being leaked inadvertently. Chris, anything to add?
No, that was perfect.
Okay, let's move on to your favorite slide. I think you like this picture.
I do. Ian Leeson is one of my favorites. So I love this slide because I think it's hard when you're starting out as a company, and you have to balance so many factors, right? You have to balance not only what does your company need. This isn't the only thing that's your job, I'm sure. And of course, then there's the budget. So how much does it cost to do all this? And all of those things sometimes can create a whirlwind where you're sitting there trying to decide what is the best avenue to take. And many times what we'll find is that companies decide, okay, we'll do this once a year, we'll do this once every 6 months, and we think that's enough. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't remember anything, and I think Michelle can attest to that. I won't remember half of the conversations we had just this morning by this afternoon. And I have a story.
Happened, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, I don't remember anything we talked about this morning. Yeah, that's
have we even talked this morning? Have we had? No, I have a story to tell about this that really solidifies this and how you can think about training. So last year, Michelle and I, as a company, we sent a little over 3 million phishing emails. We wrote a book on phishing together. Okay, so Michelle and I actually produced a book on how not only the psychology behind phishing, but how to set up a corporate phishing program. And I clicked on an actual phish last year. I clicked on one because it was the right emotional trigger, a big old Amazon email, and I'm an Amazon junkie, at the right time, a couple days before DEF CON, when I had 1 million orders into Amazon that I could not have delayed, and it told me an order was going to be delayed due to a declined credit card. And I clicked on it. And what was the reason? Well, it wasn't because I didn't have training all the time. This is what we do for a living. It was because it was the right emotional trigger at the right time. So now I ask each person to think about this. If a guy who sent 3.5 million phishing emails for a living and wrote a book on phishing can fall for a phishing email, how susceptible are your people who don't even know the difference between PH phishing and F phishing? So it's going to be very difficult for them if they only receive this training once a year. And if it's only done through computer-based training, it's going to be very difficult for them to identify a malicious email, to realize when something is dangerous, and also, most importantly, to realize what they should do when they fall for one of these fish, because that's really the big clincher, is we stop telling people if, and it's more like when. And I think even with my own personal experience there, that just proves that anyone is susceptible, and you should be thinking of what do you do when, not if. Anything to add to that one, Michelle?
No, I'm good. That was good.
Okay.
Okay, so something that we in the security field need to really work on, I think, is becoming the adversary as far as your populations are concerned. Having come from education, I understand the implications of losing trust with your students and losing trust with your population. And if you make yourself the guy who's calling everyone stupid for making stupid mistakes, you're really going to lose the opportunity to create good change in your population from a security standpoint, and to create the level of trust that they need to have in you as an expert and being on their side. So instead of being the guy that comes in with a big hammer and yells at everybody for making stupid mistakes, you really need to engage your population and become a part of help them become a part of the solution. Because, again, it's like we started at the beginning of the hour. You need to have technology and you need to have that firewall, but more importantly, the human firewall is really becoming cliche, and I totally get that, but I really like the idea of it, because this is your first line of defense. It's not going to be any shiny box that you buy as a part of your security budget. It's going to be whether or not your person allows a stranger in the door, or gives out information to a friendly voice on the phone, or responds to an email that really made them mad or sad or excited to participate in something. So by becoming an advocate for them and becoming someone who is helping them learn to become more secure both in work and in their private lives, you're going to be much more effective at your job. Security shouldn't have a negative connotation, even though most of the times when someone sees you walk in their door in response to an incident, it's not great news, and I totally get that. But that's why it's even more important for us in security to not think of our populations as being the dumb users, but to really think about ways that we can help them, because they are the ones that are going to keep the company safe. And being able to develop a great relationship and a good culture, I think, really is the first step that you need to take, as opposed to coming down on someone and having negative consequences and having them associate you with a bad thing. Anything else, Chris?
No, let's show them some of the results that could happen if they follow all of this.
Great.
So one of the exciting things that Michelle and I get to do is when we get to work with companies for multiple years, is to see the effects of doing it right. So here's just some statistics. After only 1 year of education and testing on phishing compromises, so that follows the exact procedure that we said here, which is actually really testing them, phishing their people, and then educating those same people on what happened. 26% decrease in just 1 year. And I think that's a really impressive number, especially when it comes to phone compromises that are continually getting more and more advanced. Another company, after 5 years working with them with phishing, education, and testing, now this is not even a testing statistic. There was an 89% reduction in actual malware. So not our fake phishing, but actual malware on the network. There was an 89% reduction in that after 5 years of working with that company on phishing education. And reporting is another big one. We said that before. It's so important to make sure you gather both of those. And after only 3 months of working with another company, there was a 300% increase in how their people identified malicious emails and then reported them to the proper agency within that organization. And then of course, our final one, after 1 year of phishing education and testing, we saw that ideal behavior, which ideal behavior, think about that, as a person who does not click but does report the email, right? That not only have they not put you in danger, but they potentially saved your company from from a phishing attack by reporting it, and we saw that increase by 14%, which is a huge number, if you ask me, when you think about how this education works. So these are just a couple examples. We can probably go on for another half an hour with examples of this, but it's important to know that that is the ROI. So again, you're seeing these things after 1, 3, 5 years, but the ROI is that your company is more secure and less vulnerable to these type of attacks. I think from there we just go to our questions, or I think we may be at our 30-minute mark, Michelle. So we may have to answer questions in our question box.
Well, we will have Q&A at the end, so I guess I'll provide those questions rather than this gentleman right here. But there's some contact information if you want to contact the folks at Social Engineer. We're actually going to have a poll question in a moment, but I do want to, as you mentioned there, Chris, we have questions at the end. Remind people and those who did not join us in time that we do have an opportunity to do questions at the end. Just click on the question and answer button. Make sure you get those questions in. And I do want to remind you that the best question that is asked today will be our Oscar winner, and I'll identify you. And again, that's not OSCAR, that's OSQOR, Oscar, for Online Super Question of Relevance. So we hope that you end up being an Oscar winner. So let's go to our polling question, and I want to ask the audience, and this is very relevant based on what we just heard from Chris and Michelle, but the question is, how would you best describe how your organization currently does security awareness training? And you have 5 options. We do nothing and rely on our filters. We use the break room method where we get everybody in a break room once a year. We do monthly short security videos. We do phishing tests to high-risk employees, or we do the human firewall approach, which is train all employees online and send frequent phishing attacks. So, Chris, Michelle, let me ask you, based on what you hear from your customers, what are some of the approaches here that you think are effective? Not what it, and by the way, I want to remind the audience, pick what your company does, not what you think they should do. But Chris and Eric, Chris and Michelle, I just want to know, what do you recommend they do?
Well, it's interesting, but a combination of all of these things is kind of a good idea, right? So, of course, we recommend that final one, which is training all employees online and then also sending them frequent, and we suggest even monthly phishing attacks. But high-risk employees need extra training because they're high risk. So sending specific phishing tests to those high-risk employees is something we recommend. And we also recommend either working in some kind of CBT or break room, lunch and learn type of incidents throughout the year, because we feel that CBTs are effective when they're matched with actual testing, because then what the people are seeing makes more sense.
And I also think it's important to really define what you mean by high-risk employees. There are the ones that, we call Captain Clicky Pants, the guys who will click on everything, even the emails that say, this is a test that we're testing our phishing system, don't click here. We have those guys, and definitely those guys can be defined as the high-risk guys. But then what about your people who are holders of the keys to the kingdom, the people who have access to information or accounts or people or finances? They are high risk simply because of the position that they hold. So really you need to define your populations and make sure that when you are doing security testing and education that no one is exempt, right? It only takes one person to make a mistake and then not do the right thing, and you've got a compromise, you've got a breach that's in place. So I think it's really important, once again, to define what it is you're looking for and what it is you're testing and who you're targeting and why. And those are not always easy questions to answer.
Thank you, guys. And here are our results, and it looks like the top choice is that break room herd everybody in once a year. Chris, what you said was important, but certainly only a piece of the puzzle. Let me bring Eric Cronin from Know before he hasn't had a chance to speak yet. He's our next speaker. But Eric, let me ask you, anything in the results surprise you in terms of how the security training is done?
Yeah, I don't know that it's a surprise so much because we see it fairly often, but it's unfortunate that most people do it with just the break room side of there. I can't agree more with a lot of what Chris and Michelle have said here. It takes a bit of all this, and I think that human firewall approach is something that we all want to strive towards. And I think that they're correct that some of these other things, like doing some additional training to high-risk employees, or I'd even go so far as to say employees that are in specific roles, for example, those that handle credit card information or other sort of similar information, should have some additional training based on that and or tests related to that put to them as well.
Okay, thanks, Eric. And I would say the surprise to me is that 30% are doing that human firewall approach, and it dawned on me, I have no idea if my company is doing that with me. So hopefully they are. So Eric, let me turn things over to you now. We'll get the perspective from KnowBe4, and again, Eric Krohn is the security awareness advocate for KnowBe4. So Eric, why don't you take it away?
Great, thank you very much. Just want to start off by saying, thank you to Chris and Michelle. I definitely appreciate their views on things, and I think we align pretty heavily with what they say. And I do absolutely love that Stormtrooper Doberman slide. I've seen that one before from you guys, and I really like it. I just have to wonder who got that dog in the suit. I don't think that would be a fun experience. So that being said, and painting the nails as well. So not a job I'd like to have. A little bit about KnowBe4 and what we do. We're the world's most popular integrated security awareness training and simulated phishing platform. And we're based here in Tampa, Florida, which we're preparing to possibly get very wet here in the near future. Thank you to Matthew. We've partnered with Kevin Mitnick, very popular guy, very good at the social engineering side of things. He's our Chief Hacking Officer, yet another one of those wonderful titles. One of these days I aspire to hold a title like that myself. And what we do here is we help thousands of organizations manage this problem of social engineering. Now, we don't call ourselves a solution. We aren't the fix to this because it takes defense in depth. It takes a lot more than just one thing to fix this, but we do believe we're a key part of resolving this issue. And so why are we here? Why do we do what we do? We're here because the employees are the weakest link. We believe that so many of these attacks, they're moving away from this hardened perimeter firewall technical side and really working on the people that are already within the organization that have the access and the rights and behind all of those wonderful technical controls as well. This is obvious in some of these stats, like 91% of successful breaches starting with a spear phishing attack. This is being used over and over again to get into these systems. CEO fraud and its cousin, the W-2 scams, is going crazy here, billions of dollars in damages. And of course, everyone's favorite, ransomware, has just gone nuts these last couple years as well. So the culture, though, the culture needs to shift in the organizations, and it needs to impact everyone, okay, because everybody is susceptible to it, okay? Your folks in HR are susceptible to these W-2 scams. Ransomware, pretty much anyone can get ransomware. Folks in your leadership need to know about the CEO fraud sorts of things as well. And this all needs to be baked into the culture. Everybody needs to be aware of it. They need to have heard of it and understand what's going on. And just to give you an idea, this slide here kind of shows this is the history and evolution of ransomware, right? So this year there were like 14 in the first half, different strains of ransomware that are coming out. And the reason I put this up there is it's a good visual impact of how fast these attacks are coming. And they're coming faster than before. And, these threats are becoming more prominent, and you have to bake this into the organizational culture as opposed to it being a bolt-on or an afterthought, because this is happening so regularly and so fast, and it's a very lucrative deal for these bad actors. So we need to get ahead of that, and the only way we're going to get ahead of this game of cat and mouse, if you will, is to get the culture of the organizations changed. So what can you do to do that, right? That's why we're here. I think you need to train your users immediately. That's by far the biggest return on investment that you'll see, as was mentioned before. Huge return on investment with training your users. They need to be trained decently. Security awareness training has kind of a bad rap from some of the past ways of doing it, and the training needs to be good training to be effective. And I'm a tech guy myself, and I'll be honest with you, I've put together some security awareness training things for people, and they just weren't all that great because, well, I'm a technical guy, and I don't know how to communicate all that well necessarily with the folks in marketing, or at least not leave a point with them on that. So you need to make sure that they're trained well, train them immediately. Another thing you need to do is, because of that CEO fraud and those W-2 scams, you need to check if your domain is susceptible to spoofing. And if it is, through some business requirement, and there are some business requirements out there that you want to be able to do that, you need to let your folks know immediately, especially in the higher executive levels, and make them aware of the risk that you have there if your domain is susceptible to spoofing. In other words, if somebody from an outside organization can send an email to your CEO with a reply to address of that CEO on there, you really need to make sure they understand that, right? You need to look at the procedures for like funds transfers or sensitive information handling. Anything that's a large funds transfer, or let's say you're shipping off a bunch of W-2s, needs to have two people involved in that transfer other than the requester. So that's something that you need to really get through to people, and you need to let people know why it is you're trying to do this. And yes, it may not move quite as quickly, but this is the threat that's out there. In other words, we could be getting requests that we think are from the boss, and we really need more than one pair of eyes on these things. Also, suggest a pick up the phone first policy. Your CEO or your C-level folks, whomever, they need to understand that you can pick up the phone and ask them questions about something. Hey, I got this email from you, and I want to make sure that it came from you because there are some dangerous things out there. And your people should never be afraid to do that. They should never be afraid that your leadership is going to get on their case about it or wasting their time or give them a hard time about that, because it's so important. So the leadership, your upper management, needs to understand the threat, and they need to understand and say, I'm okay with somebody picking up the phone first. This needs to be part of that culture, right? From a technical guy standpoint, you need to keep up with those OS and application patches. It's not always easy to do that because everybody needs to hold off on this or hold off on that, or I have this going on or that going on. And it's really easy to push these things along. But so much of the malware, so much of the ransomware, so many of these things take advantage of those 0 days or those recent vulnerabilities, that this needs to be something that is just accepted as it will happen. When patches come out, you have, well, we had Patch Tuesday, and then the next week they go through this, they go through that, and that just needs to be built in. So everybody expects that, and unless there's a dire emergency, that is going to take priority over most other things. And then finally, test your backups. This needs to be something that's just plain done. So you bring a new machine or new server on the network. You need to do all of these things and run through it and all that, but also test your backups. It just needs to be something that's done without having to be said separately. It should be part of your lists. So you should test it on all the new machines, and you should do restores throughout time on your other machines as well, your existing infrastructure, because this is the number 2 thing in the fight against ransomware especially, is to have good backups. We like to call them weapons-grade backups. So moving on here, we believe the defense in depth is very important here, okay? You have to have some technology. You have to have some non-technical or low-tech sorts of things as well. Whoa, okay, let me change that back there. My slide got ahead of me. what we talk about here is, you can see this is kind of a top-down view and very high level. But you have your perimeters, you have your firewalls and your IPS there. You have your internal network, which is going to be like your IDS. It's going to be those sorts of things in there. You've got your hosts. Those are protected by the endpoint protection, registry integrity monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. Applications, again, keeping them patched, keeping them up to date. And your data, so file integrity monitoring, those sorts of things are all very, very important. But what surrounds all of this and what allows you to do all of this, if you will, is going to be those policies and procedures and awareness. And it seems a little bit odd to think about it that way. However, awareness to your leadership, awareness of the threats, awareness of what's going on and how often it's happening and who it's impacting will help you write those policies that are key to securing your information. Okay? Without good policies, as was mentioned before, you're just not going to be able to get very far. So in order to get policies like, hey, I don't want anyone to be able to download executables from the internet. We want to block that completely. There's going to be people that complain that have a reason to do that, et cetera, et cetera. And without a good, strong policy and without leadership being behind it, you're not going to be able to put those procedures in place to block those. So it's very important that everyone is aware of the threats that are going on. Sometimes the users will go, you know what, I understand why, and so I'll work around it. But oftentimes your leadership also has to back you on that. So moving along here, best practices, we're all about measuring too. So we like to see a baseline test. Doesn't have to be everybody in the organization. Maybe you pick out, maybe 100 people or so in a larger organization, and you do a piece from each representative department, if you will, or role. Do your baseline test. See where you're at, because it is very, very important to measure what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what the impact of it is. Then you train the users. We can't necessarily expect them to stop these threats if we don't teach them what to look for. And then again, we fish the users. We also agree that once a month is probably a very good point with which to fish these folks. So you send them simulated phishing attacks. Make sure there are current events or threats, things that really matter, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then you look at the results. So, I agree there. It's not just the clicks that matter. The reports matter as well. So you want to see how many people have reported that. In our system, we use what's called the Phish Alert button. It's actually available through our website to anyone. And what it does is it allows the users to click on it. It takes that message, moves it off to whomever you designate it going to. And then the users, it's out of their inbox, and people can make a choice on what to do with that in your IT team there. The other thing to look at is with these phishing ones, you want to see if people enter data too. That's a third one. If you send them to a landing page, for example, a mock Office 365 login, you want to see if they entered the data. You don't want them necessarily to capture the data that they put in there, but you want to see that they actually went that other step as well. And when you're doing this, the culture really needs to be positive reinforcement. Like they said before, no wall of shame. You want to tell people, hey, good job. You want them part of the fight against this and feel like they have something involved. And so tying them together and letting them know that, this is also applicable at home is very, very important to them. This isn't a punishment. This is all part of, we're here to help you against the bad guys, right? So awareness training, so many of them are just superficial, done for compliance. We really need to make sure the folks understand the real threat that's going on out there. Compliance doesn't mean secure. We all know that. But it needs to be comprehensive too. So this coordinated campaign idea that we do here, training, you can't just train them, as was said before, and walk away, train them again a year later and expect to be safe. you really need to do the training. You need to fish the folks after the training. So when you combine these things, good things happen. The baseline, as I spoke about here before, you want to find your baseline. You want to see where you're at, and you want to see then, you want to start measuring what's happening as you move forward through your phishing campaigns. It's very important to know where you're starting from. It also helps you when you go back to your leadership to be able to inform them of the progress. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it, so you need to have this starting point. Then we agree as well, you train everybody. We train everybody from the boardroom to the break room, we like to say, top to bottom. Everybody needs to get training. This helps it resonate. It helps when somebody hears something, they go, oh yeah, I've heard that before, and it makes sense to them. You need to educate your top leadership ASAP. Those are definitely a target. They handle the big money. They handle all of those sorts of things. So you definitely need to educate them immediately. Even if you can't fully train them yet, let them know the threats that are out there, right? And the training needs to be interactive too. Can't just put up slides, let it go. It has to be interactive, some questions and answerings, things that want to keep them engaged as they move forward through the training. And then finally, you need to fish them like the bad guys. There are some folks that don't that are concerned about this, especially in the HR side. And this comes back again to where the messaging is critical on this. When we do this, the idea is to change their behavior, not to catch them doing bad things. And that's something for us as the technical folks, the implementers of this, to remember, and it's something that we need to make sure that our audience understands as well. This isn't about catching people, it's about saving them from problems, okay? So full random attacks, it has to come at different times, otherwise people prairie dog and they warn each other. Keep them up to date on some of the stuff that's going on. And then you need to personalize the emails. Make them like the bad guys do it. You definitely need to drive that message home. This is what's going to happen, because if you don't do it this way, the bad guys are going to do it this way, and the people are going to be frustrated. You also, you don't want to start them off on the hardest things. You don't want to start them off by causing them a lot of trepidation. You don't want to make them feel bad about everything. You don't want them to be so paranoid they're afraid to open anything. So that's where the training is very, very important. We have like a 22 things to look at in an email resource that everybody in our office has pinned up to their cube, because we do fish ourselves. We eat our own dog food. Sometimes it's not pretty. But we all have that up there. And we keep it in the cube, and when we get an email, we can look at it and go, okay, do these things make sense? Was it sent at the time of day that it makes sense? Did HR send me something at 2 a.m. on a Saturday? Ooh, something's weird there. So it gives you those sorts of things to look at. But you want to personalize these emails, definitely. You want to do it like the bad guys are doing it. And you definitely want to make sure it's real with what's going on. If there's a current event that happens, for example, when Prince died, within days, there were all kinds of things flying around from Prince. When the iPhone 7 was released, there's a lot of these that are running around out there trying to get people to click on things related to the iPhone. Get your free iPhone here, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to stay on top of that if you want things to happen. And then, again, continue to test them. This is a circle. This is not something that you do and end and walk away from. You make these things tougher over time so that people, as they start to get a little bit more comfortable and confident in what they're able to see, again, you're going to raise that difficulty, not frustrated and thinking, oh, I'll never be able to get this, because that's one of the worst things you can do for your folks, is to make them think that they're never going to be able to get this, when indeed they can. You can make some contests with this. We've seen organizations do things along the lines of the department with the lowest click rate this month gets a pizza party or something along those lines. Always preferred over the wall of shame, like this was the worst department. You always want to make it positive reinforcements. And you need to measure that. So if your numbers drop again, in your click links and your report links, you need to kind of look at that and go, okay, so why did it drop and what can I do differently? If all of a sudden, on the other hand, you get super high ones, like maybe the Pizza Hut email goes out and everybody in the organization clicks on it, maybe you should think about reworking your cafeteria options. I don't know. But those sorts of things you want to look at in order to improve the experience. You can't just completely walk away. Now, there are tools that help with this kind of in a set and forget manner. And when we say that, though, what we mean is you set up these campaigns, you still want to look at these. You have them email you the results after each one. Take a quick look at it and go, okay, maybe we need to adjust how it is we're doing this in order to make it a little bit more difficult, or we need to train people specifically on certain things. And organizationally, what we found is this is a huge number. This is actually 300,000 users over the course of a year. And this represents what we've seen with the users. So initially, the overall average is 15.9%. You train them there, you can see it drops down a little bit. Now, if you were to stop right there, you would see that curve come right back up over time to probably very close to where it was initially. But by continuing to reinforce the training through the simulated phishing exercises and point of failure training when they do click on bad links, etc., 12 months later, they were down to 1.2%. Now, again, this is over 300,000 people across a year. So it definitely works. This is a proven process if you do it this way. So that being said, here's some resources you guys can check out. These are free things that we do. The Phish Alert button is what I talked about there, where you can set that up right now. It works in Outlook. We're also working on a Gmail version where you can click on it, the users, it goes out, and the users have the ability to report these emails. We can do a domain spoof test and a couple other things there. So that being said, I know we're getting a little bit close on time. I want to thank you guys very much, and I think we have another survey here, and we'll wrap it up.
Eric, thanks a ton. Appreciate it. Some really good stuff there. As you did mention, a survey should have just opened on your screen. If it hasn't, there is a red icon button there that allows you to take the survey, and we do appreciate you providing that feedback. It really helps us improve our events. So let's get on to questions. We have time for a few questions here. I'm going to ask Michelle the first question. The question is, we currently phish and video train multiple times a month. Our success rate or users clicking on phishing emails is declining, not increasing. What do you suggest to change their behavior?
Well, I'm going to assume that by declining, that what they're saying is that it's going in a bad direction, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, to make sure I understood the question properly. I think the important thing to emphasize is that there need to be consequences, both positive and negative, for the choices that employees make. And I'm not saying that somebody clicks a phish and they get fired, because, again, this is a human issue. So if you fire someone, you're going to hire someone in that position, and you're going to have all the same issues and training concerns as well. So what I'm saying, though, is that there should be immediate feedback for people so they know whether they made the correct choice versus making a wrong choice. And then if there does need to be additional follow-up training, I think that needs to be done in an immediate fashion. So I think it's just like when we were kids. You touch the stove and burn your hand. That is a consequence, and that is not something that you will forget. And I think it's very important, though, as along the lines of what Eric said and what Chris and I preach, is that in general, these need to be as positive as possible. They need to be constructive. And so if you have people that aren't following the rules, then the consequence needs to be, here are the ways that you could have identified this phish, and as a result, you're going to be tested continuously. And in terms of positive consequence, maybe the folks who pass continually, they do get something. We have a client that associates performance on these tests with bonus structure. That is something that will really get people's attention. So as part of your job, if you do this well, you might get an extra bonus at the end of the year. So I think the key here is consequences, both good and bad, and immediate.
Okay, thank you. And Eric, this one will be perfect for you. The question is, other than reporting and videos, what are some other advantages of the KnowBe4 phishing platform versus me utilizing Kali Linux to send spoofed emails?
Okay. The GUI, for one thing. Yeah, that is. That really is. Here's the thing. It's tough to explain just how simple the product is to use, the platform that we have. What I can recommend is let's show you a demo. We do live demos all the time if you want to take a look at it. You can see for yourself. But really, what it boils down to is everything here is very well integrated. We believe in that comprehensive solution here. So you can track everything a user's done from top to bottom, front to back. In addition, we tie in some vishing and USB tests as well in the platform. So all of these things track within the user's profile, and you can see when they were trained, what they clicked on, did they enter data, did they do a lot of these things, and it's all very easy to manage just because it's put together. Now, we focused on the small medium business when we first started up here, which means we try to make it really easy for the guy that's wearing a whole bunch of different hats. We don't want to throw another big hat on him. And by doing so, it does scale very well as well. But we've really made it simple to manage.
Terrific. And Chris, let me ask you the next question. And if we're really lucky, I'll sneak in one more after that. The question is, it always seems to be the same users that fail the phishing test. We have 15 locations, so any training besides something online is out of the question. Is it possible to get predictable results with an online tool? And maybe Eric can follow up Chris's response.
Well, I guess that's a hard question to answer because I would need to know more about the company, right? Like, are they also collecting reporting data? Are they also, like, are these same users clicking but then reporting, or have they not done that in the beginning but now they're doing it? So then there's some positive adjustment. Also, what is type of training being used afterward, and is it immediate? You know, upon click, do they go to a landing page, or is it a week later or a month later? I know that's a really bad answer, but I believe that with following up a click with an immediate education, finding out if there's other statistics that they're collecting, those things can create the positive change that they're looking for.
Okay, Eric, do you have any follow-up to that?
Yeah, I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction from what we talked about a little bit ago. While I believe that definitely positive reinforcement is the way to go, there are going to be times when you may have to get with your HR group and say, look, these people aren't either motivated to take the time to look at this and not click on it. Maybe they don't care. No matter how you look at it, these folks are putting your organization at risk. I do say that if you're going to go to deal with this at an HR level, if they're just continually doing this, it needs to be private between you and HR. This is not something that ever goes public, but I do know organizations that have taken it, 3-4 steps, and the person has to be terminated because they are definitely putting the organization at risk. Now, that's going to depend on the risk appetite of your organization, but if the folks are just clicking on whatever because there's no real consequence to it, that can certainly help you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, there are a ton of terrific questions still to ask, but unfortunately we have run out of time. I do know that our speakers will respond to all the questions that came in if they haven't already. So I just want to remind everybody that for more information related to the webinar, a link has just opened in front of you. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Want to announce our Oscar winner. That was Jim Jackson of PBI Bancorp. You are our genius of the day. Jim, thanks for the question. Thanks to everybody for all of their terrific questions. It was really hard to choose, but all the votes are in. So thank you for attending today's webinar, Making IT Security Part of Your Business Culture. That's brought to you by Dark Reading, KnowBe4, and it's broadcast by UBM. This webinar is copyright 2016 by UBM. Presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Dark Reading and KnowBe4, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests, Michelle Fincher, Charles Hadnagy, and Eric Krohn, thanks for your time, and have a great day.